Hi, my name is Krista Berry. I'm the Executive Director of the Old Stone House Museum in Historic Village, and welcome to the Smithsonian's Traveling Crossroads Change in Rural America exhibit. This exhibit has been touring the whole nation over the last several years, and it is focused on how rural communities adapt and change over time. It's brought to you here in Newport, Vermont, and thanks to the partnership with Vermont Humanities, New Hampshire Humanities, and the Newport Downtown Development. Although this is a self-guided tour, we'll take you through it today. So this panel, and each panel really depicts a different theme as it relates to rural communities and then their evolution into today's society. This panel in particular, Owning and Using the Land, talks about the beginning of, indigenous societies and where every main street began, mostly as an open field or some type of forest. Newport downtown, our main street used to be a marsh.
Really?
At the very beginning.
That's interesting.
Well, it's right on the edge of a huge lake, right?
That makes sense.
Yeah. It talks about sort of that transition between, indigenous culture, stewardship, into white settlement, into, inevitable industrialization, and into today. So this panel, titled Managing Change, is sort of the encompassing, overarching theme of the whole exhibit, which is change of rural main streets over time. One thing that visitors will notice about this exhibit when they come to view it is that it raises a lot of questions. Questions like, how can we ensure that natural landscapes that we've known for generations remain for future generations? Or what is the identity that reflects your rural community? So while the exhibit is generic to all rural communities, we do find ways to personalize it to the Northeast Kingdom. So this back wall is our contribution to the exhibit. So while the Traveling Smithsonian exhibit was something that was produced in Washington, D.C., and it talks about downtowns all across the country, this is the part that is particular to our part of the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont here, picturing the past. This exhibit is on display here at the Tasting Center as part of Crossroads. It will also be available ongoing next year at the Old Stone House Museum in our Lawrence Barn. And so we invite our visitors to come and take a walk-through time as part of our 100-year anniversary at our Neighbor to Neighbor series and picture the past with us. So this panel here, Accelerating Change, focuses on America in the post-war World War II boom and how, the boom that was the war then became a bit of a bust in a lot of local communities. After the war effort ended, there was a lot of change across the country, really, and not unique to here either. You see kind of before the war effort, there was big advancements in union organizing, right, because of industrialization and what was happening, and workers' rights being really at the forefront. And then when you start having World War I and then going into World War II, you kind of see the erosion of the union effort because there had to be a national impetus for security and national defense. And so the lens of focus changes from your immediate community to country as a whole. And then unions were not necessarily seen as patriotic, right? And so then after the World Wars, you start seeing the resurgence of unions coming back because you had such a disruption to the industrial world through the wars. You had soldiers returning, you had women that had gone into the workforce, they're now having to leave the workforce, they don't necessarily want to leave the workforce. You have a lot of change going on all at once, and so you see a resurgence of unionizing coming back, not just in employment and industry, but also in civil and cultural identities as well.
That's really interesting. Did it spike more after World War II, I'm guessing? More so than World War I?
It did eventually, yes, because you also start seeing the civil rights efforts coming in after World War II. And so once America gets kind of out of being in foreign wars and we have a period of time where we're not in a foreign war, we start looking at national issues more closely. And so that's where you start seeing a lot more civil rights energy kind of bubbles up during that time frame too.
So people can fill out these postcards and they put them in that mailbox that's to your left?
Yep, they can either fill out a postcard and they can put it in the mailbox, or they can hang it on the board here for people to see. And there are different prompt questions like, if you were granted one wish, what change for good would you make in your town? So this is the back of the welcome sign, and tracing change, again, change being the big overarching theme of the exhibit. And these are flip books, and so they ask questions like, how can rural schools meet 21st century challenges, or how does immigration change rural communities? And you can flip those books and interact with some of the ways people have answered those questions.
And there's one question on there that I noticed. I think a lot of main streets in America face it. Is how do local retailers survive in an economy dominated by large businesses? That doesn't also take into consideration the internet, but it does.
As a large business unto itself, right?
Yeah. So it's not a unique struggle to Newport.
Yeah. And as you flip that, you'll see basically some answers. So major retailers offer consumers a wider selection of products at lower prices, but customers have moved to larger stores established locally owned stores. So this title is Sustaining Communities. It focuses mostly on the era of the New Deal, which was the 1930s, and that following the Great Depression was how the country got back on its feet. And so a lot of, again, we kind of talked about that change earlier of the post-war change. So things that really disrupt economy and culture, things like wars and the Great Depression, although not a war, had just as much of an impact, if not more of an impact, than some of the wars that have happened in our history. And so how you address the needs of your community to come back from hard times is really the focus of this particular panel.
Cool.
So the Creating Identity kiosk is one that I find of particular interest, and this explores how during the 19th century the landscape was depicted as part of the creation of the American identity, not just, in the terms of rural or industrial or anything like that, but even beyond. It was a larger conversation that America was having with the world as a country that was being newly settled by these European cultures. They were sending back these images to basically create a mythos that was American, because Europe had a very long history of human civilization going back to, at that time they were particularly interested in the ancient Greek culture. And when you come to America, although we also have thousands of years of human presence in this country, that to the Europeans was not what they wanted to talk about. What they wanted to talk about was the landscape and how that landscape turned into American identity and American myth. So this is sort of a visual continuation of a lot of the themes we've already discussed about change and persistence, this being a photo-visual representation of the different types of people who have, come to America and make up the American community. Especially, there is a focus on the immigration story here. I think there's always been an interesting balance between romanticizing, like this panel here, I think really does romanticize the idea of the country life. But when you talk to people who are living the country life, it's also very hard. Growing up around here myself, I always said that I would never want to be a farmer because they have to work so friggin' hard. You know what I mean? So I've always really had an appreciation coming from this area of how hard it is to live in areas like this sometimes, compared to, and it's hard to live anywhere, you know what I mean? I've lived in cities too, but your challenges are different. And the Back to the Land movement, I think, is another one that, with historic hindsight, kind of gets romanticized. Yeah. So the exhibit in general, I think, really tries to kind of juxtapose some of that romanticizing the rural living country lifestyle versus really facing with the realities of it and what those challenges also look like, and raising many questions. You will see so many questions raised throughout all of these kiosks and all of these panels that are just meant to solicit the viewer to think about it in their own life and in their own family and in their own community. So for me, this feels like one of the kind of concluding paragraph kiosks of the exhibit. This talks about persistence and survival and revitalization going into the future. There's parts of this exhibit that talk about the history and what has happened to main streets, and this one is really talking about what is continuing to happen to main streets and what can we today do to our main streets to see them into the future in successful ways. Thank you so much for exploring the Crossroads Change in Rural America exhibit with me today. We are so thankful at the Ulster House Museum to have been able to bring this to the community of Newport, Vermont for its final showing, and we hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like, you can visit us in Brownington, Vermont. We've been going for 100 years. This is our 100th anniversary. The museum opened in 1925, and we are hoping to go for 100 years more, and that requires our neighbors to come and see us and support us, and we hope to see you soon.